Even as France continues to remain in shock over the brutal terror attack in Nice, which claimed the lives of 3 people, and French president's warning of more such attacks in the future, another attack has taken place in the French city of Lyon, where an Orthodox priest has been shot. The priest, who has Greek nationality, was closing his church when he was shot by the attacker using a shotgun. Local media reports suggest that the priest is now in a serious condition. Local media reports that the attacker has fled from the spot and a manhunt has now been launched to hunt him down. This is the information that we are getting at the moment. A priest has been shot in the French city of Lyon, and the attacker has fled the scene. Now, this is just hours after the French Interior Minister said that more such attacks are possible. More attacks on French soil are likely as France is engaged in a war against Islamist ideology. This is what its Interior Minister had said, and he had said that we are in a war against an enemy that is both inside and outside. We need to understand that there have been and there will be other such events in these terrible attacks and these terrible times. But what we do not know at the moment is the identity of the attacker of the Lyon attack. The police are still searching for the attacker who shot this Orthodox priest and has fled the scene. Joining us on this broadcast is Mikey K. He's an investigative journalist. Mikey, over to you. What are you hearing at the moment? What's the condition of the priest? Do we have any clue who is the attacker?
It's still very early days, Hubert. It's the reporting on this literally just came out less than half an hour ago, and it's still what's called a rapidly evolving situation. The authorities are still looking for the person that perpetrated this crime, and the injuries of the priest still yet to the extent of the injuries to the priest are still yet to be known. What we do know is that this attack has come just 2 days after a terrible attack in Nice, where the centre of that attack was a church, where an elderly woman and 2 others were assaulted, and that comes 10 days after the beheading of a school teacher. So there's starting to be certain links and threads that are starting to materialise. One of them is the last 2 have been situated near a church, which is obviously the emblem of Christianity. And then I think the second really key one here is President Macron's words were, in essence, that the freedom of press, the freedom of speech are the bedrock of democracy. And the fact that Charlie Hebdo went ahead and published the cartoon caricatures of the Prophet Muhammad, and that President Macron is defending that, is what looks like it could be triggering these most recent attacks spread across the country. So I think there's certainly the fact that President Macron has taken one stance, and he's very adamant about that, and he is defending the bedrock of democracy in terms of those freedoms. That's not going to change, and therefore I think that you're starting to sort of get this momentum of these attacks going on, where the more that these attacks occur, the more that they're publicised, the more that they're spread on social media, the more that they will encourage potentially future attacks. So I think sort of at this point the French authorities are really starting to look at the numbers of security forces that they are deploying on the streets, given the sort of recent attacks. That's gone from 3,000 to 7,000. The security officials and the intelligence authorities inside the country are going to be talking with people like the Tunisian authorities, which is where the attacker from 2 days ago stemmed from. They're going to be trying to identify where these attacks are emerging from, to what extent they are associated with cells, or if they're what's called so-called lone wolf. And all of this sort of information will be being processed, and contingency plans will be being worked up as we speak at this very moment.
Absolutely, Mikey. French President Emmanuel Macron recently gave an interview where he said that he understands that the publication of the cartoons of Prophet Muhammad may have hurt Muslim sentiments, but he said that that can be never be a justification for violence. He said that France will never give up on its values and on free speech. Meanwhile, France has stepped up security nationwide to guard against such extremist attacks after the fatal stabbing inside a church in Nice. Meanwhile, protests had flared up in other parts of the world as well, including Middle East, Asia and Africa, against France and amid calls for boycott of French products. President Emmanuel Macron deployed thousands of soldiers to protect sites, including places of worship and schools. And the nation is at its highest level of security alert after that deadly attack in Nice. France moved to the highest security alert. More and more soldiers were deployed to protect key sites such as places of worship and schools. However, now we're getting news that an Orthodox priest has been shot outside a church in the French city of Lyon. The entire area has been cordoned off. Also joining us on this broadcast is Lisa Lewis, who is a journalist. Lisa, can we expect more measures by France to further boost its key sites such as government buildings, schools and places of worship? Because the French government had said that they do expect more such attacks. However, I would reiterate that we do not know the identity of the attacker of the Lyon incident so far.
Yes, as you said, it's still a moving news situation. We have to be very cautious with what we are hearing at the moment. We only know that a man shot a priest and that he's on the run. The priest's life is in danger. Now, the government beforehand had already pledged to increase security. I'm here in this, where the last attack happened, and 120 additional police forces and soldiers are already being deployed in the streets to protect places of worship. Churches, cathedrals are being guarded, and the government has also announced that they would increase and strengthen their fight against radical Islamism. But again, we have to be very cautious with this current incident. We don't know yet what's behind it.
Absolutely, Lisa. But the French government was expecting such attacks, which is why France had boosted its security apparatus to the highest level. More and more soldiers have been deployed across France. In fact, the French government said that French citizens are facing a threat not just inside France, but across the world as well. Meanwhile, just updating our viewers about the Nice attack that happened a couple of days ago. A third person has been taken into custody in France in connection with that deadly terror attack that left 3 people dead in Nice. And the government also ramped up security efforts against possible militant attacks as well. During the Nice attack, the assailant had shouted Allahu Akbar, and he had beheaded a woman and killed 2 other people inside a church in Nice. We have no information so far of a repetition of that as far as the Lyon attack is concerned. Once again, we'll just reiterate to our viewers that an Orthodox priest has been shot outside a church in the French city of Lyon. The entire area has been cordoned off, and the attacker shot the priest with a shotgun and has fled the area, and a manhunt has been launched across Lyon to nab the attacker. Also joining us on this broadcast is WION's Mandy Clark, who's joining us. Mandy, France faces a very, very tough situation, isn't it? In fact, the French Interior Minister had said that this is a war against Islamist ideology, and that France is in a war against an enemy that is both inside and outside. So these are really tough times for France.
It is an incredibly difficult situation. Of course, when it comes to this attack, we can only speculate on past history that it has a radical Islamist agenda, but of course we still don't know who is behind it. It's very early details coming in. But it is definitely in the minds among the French that this is yet another case where the government simply could not protect places of worship. That is what they promised. They've promised increased security on the streets so people can practice it, particularly the Catholic faith, which has a long tradition in France, freely. And tomorrow is a very significant day in the Catholic calendar. It's All Saints' Day. So the attack right beforehand, I know many people might be thinking Halloween, but it is an important date in that Catholic calendar. Of course, we don't know who this priest was, but there is a real concern that this is yet again a terrorist incident where they're attacking the foundations of religion and culture in France.
Meanwhile, we can just update our viewers. We are getting information that the Greek Orthodox priest is currently undergoing treatment and is said to be critical after being shot twice in the stomach. This is the latest information that we're getting, that he was shot twice, not once but twice in the stomach area. The Orthodox Greek priest has been taken to the hospital where he is said to be in critical condition. In fact, these on your screens now we're getting are live shots from Lyon, where, as you can see, the security has been beefed up. France was already on its highest security alert. It has been boosted further in Lyon. The entire area is cordoned off and a manhunt is on. The Greek Orthodox priest was severely wounded by an attacker at around 4 p.m. local time in Lyon. Now, according to initial reports that we are getting, that the attacker was described as a male and in his 40s, and that he fired his weapon twice. Now, these are just initial information that we are getting. Now, this attack just follows days after the deadly terror attack in a church in the French city of Nice, in which a terrorist decapitated a woman and murdered 2 others, injuring many others before the terrorist was shot by the police, and he is currently in police custody. The attacker was a 21-year-old Tunisian migrant who had reached Nice just days before carrying out this deadly terror attack. In fact, it was only in September that the Nice attacker had landed in Europe from Tunisia. He had landed in Italy in September, and just days before carrying out this deadly terror attack in the church in Nice, he had landed in France. But he went on to murder 3 people inside a church in Nice. Lisa continues to be with us. Lisa, we're getting live shots from Lyon in France now, and as we can see, the entire area has been cordoned off. There are ambulances there as well, and security has been beefed up in the entire region. People have been avoided in Lyon. People have been asked in Lyon to avoid this this area of the city.
Yes, obviously, people here in France, not only in Lyon but also in Nice, all across France, are now on edge because they fear that more attacks could happen, as you said, as the government said a few days ago. Again, I mean, this is a situation that France knows, obviously, because numerous attacks have been carried out on French soil since 2015. At least in 2015, there were 2 major terror attacks in January 2015 on the satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo and the Jewish supermarket Hypercacher, and then in November 2015, attacks in Paris again at the Stade de France and the Bataclan Music Hall and terraces of cafes. So people know the situation and they're really afraid that more attacks might happen. The government has deployed additional police forces and soldiers in the streets. Thousands of them will be deployed over the coming days, and in the hope that more attacks will be prevented. But again, the attack in Lyon has not been confirmed yet to be anything terrorism related, so we need to be very cautious with the information we're getting.
Absolutely, we need to be cautious. We'll just tell our viewers that the initial information that we're getting is that an Orthodox priest has been shot and injured at a church in the French city of Lyon by an assailant who has fled the scene. The priest was fired on twice at around 4 p.m. local time, and this happened as he was closing the church, and the priest is being treated on site for life-threatening injuries. The incident came 2 days after a man shouting Allahu Akbar, that is, God is greatest, beheaded a woman and killed 2 other people in a church in Nice. And this Lyon incident also comes just 2 weeks after a school teacher in Paris was beheaded by an 18-year-old Chechen, apparently who had been offended by the teacher showing cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad in a class on freedom of speech. Now, France had honored that teacher who had fallen victim to the terror attack, Samuel Paty, and France had awarded him the country's highest civilian honor. And Emmanuel Macron had said that France would never give up its values and will always defend free speech. We have Mandy Clark with us. I'll just come to you, Mandy. We're just getting information that President Emmanuel Macron has recently given an interview in which he lashed out at distortions from political leaders over cartoons of Prophet Muhammad, saying that too often people were led to believe that these cartoons were creation of the French state. Now, this interview of Emmanuel Macron will be broadcast in a few hours from now, but this is what Emmanuel Macron says, that there has been a confusion that has been fed by many media and sometimes political and religious leaders as well, which is to say that these cartoons and caricatures are in a way a project or the creation of the French government or the president. And we all know that that is not clearly the case. It was published by Charlie Hebdo, which is a private organization. It's a satirical magazine. So Emmanuel Macron has said that there has been attempts to distort information and project that these caricatures were somehow published by the French government, and that is not the case. Emmanuel Macron says that France is merely protecting its own values and freedom of expression and free speech. Mandy Clark continues to be with us. Mandy, once again, we do not know the attacker, the status of the attacker, but we now know that the Orthodox priest is getting treatment. He has been shot twice, so that's good news that so far the authorities are attempting to save the life of this priest. He was shot twice in the stomach area. But what do you make of this Emmanuel Macron's latest interview, Mandy? He says that too often it's been projected by media and by other leaders across the world to portray that it was France that actually published caricatures of the Prophet when it was in fact a satirical magazine.
Mm-hmm. I think what it speaks to, it really speaks to French ideas of, is liberté, fraternité, that those concepts that come from the revolution of freedom and freedom of expression is really a core tenement of French identity. And that's why the French has been repeatedly saying the importance of having this free speech, because they've been so vehemently supporting the right to put offensive, what other people might find offensive. I think that's where this misinterpretation that it was actually the French state that put it out and not a private company. But I think what often gets misinterpreted abroad is why they're so passionate about what would appear to be offending people. And I think it's a nuanced approach where they're not passionate about offending people. They're passionate about having the right to offend people, having the right to say exactly what they want, even if it offends others. And that is a core tenement of where that runs through the French principles. And I think this is where we're seeing these misunderstandings, that it was the French government that supports it. Of course, they support the right to free speech. They didn't, of course, create or publish it. It was Charlie Hebdo. But it just really speaks to the French national character, which Macron is so made it absolutely clear that he is duty-bound to protect French culture and French values.
Absolutely. There have been protests all across the world against Emmanuel Macron. The call was led by Turkish President Erdogan. He, in fact, even said that Macron needs mental treatment. There have been protests across the world against Macron and against France. There have been calls for boycott of French products as well, which Macron says is simply unacceptable. But, certain French leaders have also taken offense to the kind of protests that we've seen in countries like Pakistan, where during the demonstrations, protesters have demanded the beheading of the French ambassador. Now, that has angered certain French politicians as well. And Lisa, certain French politicians have demanded an immediate moratorium on immigration from countries like Pakistan and Bangladesh. Is there likely to be a tougher stance taken by the French government now against immigration, against migrants and against refugees?
Well, this is absolutely what people are asking for here. I've been talking to many people in Nice here, and the consensus amongst the Catholic and the Muslim community seems to be that immigration should be controlled in a stricter way. But putting that into practice is rather difficult, also because France is obviously part of the European Union, and France already has a very tough stance on immigrants. You know, it's very difficult when you get to France to apply for asylum. It takes a long time, and migrants have to live and camp in the streets. So it is easy to say that. It's very difficult to put it into practice, and it's very difficult to find amongst, you know, the thousands of migrants or more than tens of thousands of migrants that come to Europe every month, to find those that might actually be here to commit a horrible act of terror instead of applying for just protection or a better life.
Lisa, I'd like to thank you for joining us. I'd also like to thank Mandy Clark for joining us on this broadcast. These are live pictures that we're getting from Lyon in France, where we can tell you that an Orthodox priest was shot and injured outside a church in the French city of Lyon by an attacker who has now fled the scene. The priest was fired on twice at around 4 p.m. as he was closing the church, and the priest is being treated on the site for life-threatening injuries. A manhunt has been launched across the city of Lyon. Security status has been updated and the entire region has been cordoned off. This comes hours after French government warned that other extremist attacks could take place not only inside France but against French citizens across the world.